love this mug, but it needs a comma, says the English nerd. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens, and this is English Nerd. Today we're continuing the All About Hamlet series. We are in Act 5 at last, which means that there are going to be a ton of spoilers. Act 5, Scene 1 is commonly known as the gravedigger scene, although it is also known for being the one that has the skull in it. The Yorick. So I brought Yorick for this very special edition of All About Hamlet. So let's dive in. There's obviously a lot that goes on in this scene. If you have read or seen it, as you ought to have before listening to this analysis summary, my thoughts. So two clowns come in. This is in a churchyard. Clown originally did not mean scary clown, like something from Stephen King's It. No, it was originally a word for a rustic person. So when it says that two clowns come in, the first and the second, they're talking about two rustic people, specifically two people who are professional grave diggers, and that is what they're in the process of doing. This churchyard is right outside Elsinore, so it's really not that far from the main set. The only scene that takes place at all far away from the Palace of Elsinore is Act 4, Scene 4, the one where Hamlet gives his final soliloquy. The first gravedigger, the main guy, I like. He is somebody who loves puns. I think in that way he is a kindred spirit to Shakespeare himself, who has been accused of loving puns so much, which is considered the lowest form of comedy as far as the different types are concerned, that he will pause a scene to just chase after a pun and make that happen. He's like Dad Jokes 2.0 sometimes. And so is this gravedigger guy. He is hilarious. He also thinks he's smarter than he is. So I love that Shakespeare gives him so much life. Let me show you a place where we can see his humor and also the fact that he does think he's a lot better than he actually is. The first clown is trying to, or the first gravedigger, I prefer to call him, and so does everyone else, is trying to prove his superiority by posing a riddle to the second guy. So he asks, what is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter? And the second gravedigger does a pretty good job answering the riddle. He says, the gallows maker, for that frame outlives 1,000 tenants. You can hear the snare going almost continually for the first couple pages of this scene. It's hilarious. So the first clown responds to that good answer with this. He says, I like thy wit well in good faith. The gallows does well. You did a nice job. But how does it well? It does well to those that do ill. Now, thou dost ill to say that the gallows is built stronger than the church. Argal, the gallows may do well to thee. So hopefully you followed the logic of that. What I like is his use of the word argal. The first gravedigger says this several times, and argal is not actually a word. So what is he doing there? Here is a man who's been around the palace, around educated, lofty people his entire life, but he himself is not an educated man. So he's overheard people saying the Latin word ergo, therefore, and he's trying to appropriate that, and so he ends up saying, Argal, the gallows may do well to thee. He says it in such a confident, self-assured way that I think he is delightful, and anybody who knows a little bit of Latin will get the joke there. Hopefully some people out there do. One thing that's nice about working at the school where I teach English is that you can make Latin jokes and a lot of people will get them. So that's nice. The two gravediggers are joking around. Yes, we finally get some much needed reprieve from the very, very serious subject matter that came in Act 4 when Polonius was killed and Ophelia went crazy and drowned and Laertes is out for blood and the king is plotting Hamlet's murder and all these terrible things are happening. But the subject matter is still not super light here in Act 5 because the scene opens with these two gravediggers discussing Ophelia's burial. Did she kill herself? And if so, why is she being buried where everyone else is? Because at the time, suicide was considered a sin against God. It grieved everyone, as you can see in Dante's Inferno, for instance. The second round of Circle 7 is reserved for those who take their own lives. But there was an understanding that this is something that doesn't appreciate the value of the human life, the God-given human life, and so those who committed suicide generally would be buried away from people who died natural deaths or died in battle or something like that. So the subject matter that they're arguing about is really dark, but they do it in a way that is humorous, like those people who diffuse really serious situations with humor. You see that with a lot of cop shows and things like that, but that's what's going on here. Some great performances in the two movie versions that I've been suggesting you watch. That is the David Tennant version. The highlight of that one for me is when the gravedigger, the main gravedigger, holds up his coffee and his sandwich to illustrate, okay, well, if she goes to the water, then that's that she took her own life, but if the water comes to her, then she didn't, and all of that. He does a great job. And then Billy Crystal, of all people, plays the gravedigger in Kenneth Branagh's version, and of course he's a hoot as well, so make sure to check out both of those if you can. They are spectacular. After the second gravedigger leaves and goes to get some liquor for the first guy who apparently runs the show, Hamlet and Horatio come back. So we know from previous scenes that Hamlet was kidnapped by pirates that I think were his friends, and it was all organized, and then dropped back off in Denmark. Horatio went to meet him, and then they're both walking back to the palace. Now, what's easy to forget is that Hamlet has been out of the loop as far as all of the goings-on with Ophelia and Laertes, so when he comes back and sees the grave being dug by this man, he doesn't immediately think of Ophelia. In fact, he doesn't realize that it's her grave until later. So he comes back, he finds the first gravedigger singing this happy song as he's digging, just throwing skulls because they would bury a lot of people in the same place. They would kind of make some room and then add another body to the royal plot. Hamlet here starts philosophizing, as he does. He's such a... starts philosophizing about the nature of death and how we don't know who these skulls once were and how everyone will end up this way. What if this were a politician? What if this were a lawyer? What if this were somebody important in the town and now they're nothing but, you know, you could bowl with their heads, just throwing the skull down the lane and knocking over the pins and nobody would really care. I kind of like Horatio in this scene. He's normally just the straight man, and he is here as well, but here especially, he reminds me of those people. Have you ever read Socrates, the dialogues by Plato about Socrates? There's always the yes Socrates person. Socrates will start talking about his philosophy and then some guy will say, yes Socrates, of course Socrates. Horatio is the yes Socrates guy for Hamlet here, at least up to a certain point. After a while, Horatio actually reaches the end of his patience, which is saying something. It's considerable, and says, you might need to just take a step back, Hamlet. Or to consider too curiously to consider. So basically what Horatio is saying is, you're thinking too hard about this, you're thinking too much about death, you need to just take a chill pill, Hamlet, and relax for half a second, which I know is not your strong suit, buddy. Anyway, before we get to the end of Horatio's patience, though, we do get this wit off between the gravedigger and Hamlet, which is a highlight of this scene for me, so I want to show you what I like about it. I think this first gravedigger is kind of like what Hamlet would have become if he weren't so depressed. I think he would be somebody who was sort of flippant and smart and just did his thing. So when Hamlet first comes up, he asks the very reasonable question, what man do you dig this for? The gravedigger says, for no man, sir. Well, what woman then? For none neither. Well, who is to be buried in the grave? One that was a woman, sir, but rest her soul, she's dead. Like, ah, that's terrible. I shouldn't be laughing. I'm such a terrible person. I think this scene is really funny, even though the humor is really dark and terrible. Ah, so good. And it continues in that vein. Through the conversation, Hamlet starts realizing that the gravedigger does not know who he is. So this gravedigger is an excellent chance for Hamlet to find out what people have been saying about him in his absence. What does everybody think about his being sent off to England by Claudius? Is everybody liking Claudius more, or what's going on? And the gravedigger says, oh yeah, Hamlet was sent to England because he's crazy. If he gets better, that's great, but it's England. If he doesn't get better, nobody will notice. Everybody there is as mad as he is. Remember, the original audience of this was all English people, so that would have landed, I think, as a joke. Everybody's as crazy as Hamlet, and there's a lot of truth to that too. He's like a prism of all the bad things that we are within ourselves, to get, more philosophical, like Hamlet does. One more piece of really interesting information, or I guess it's kind of 2 for 1, is a timeline. How old is Hamlet? Now, it's easy to picture Hamlet as just a college student because he was at university in Wittenberg at the beginning of the story, or before it began. So you'd think, okay, well maybe he's 19, maybe he's 20, maybe he's somewhere in there. No, he was born the day that King Hamlet Sr. overcame Fortinbras Sr. That was a big day in the life of Hamlet Sr., apparently. And that was 30 years ago. Hamlet is 30 years old, which is far too old to be this waffly, I think. But, being around that age myself, I guess it doesn't surprise me too much that he's still this way. But yeah, he's 30 years old. Isn't that nuts? Hamlet starts asking specific questions about how the gravedigger trade works. Actually, it's the gravedigger who says, do you know whose this was? And Hamlet says, no, obviously I don't. It's just a head. And the gravedigger says, this same skull, sir, was Yorick's skull, the king's jester. And the jester who died when Hamlet was 7 years old. So it's been lying in the earth 23 years. And that's where we get that famous scene where Hamlet looks into the eyes of this person that he used to know that has now become nothing more than a skull. A few things about this. One, this is the most famous example in all of literature or art that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe Day of the Dead kind of stuff rivals it, but one of the very best examples that we have of memento mori. So that was a picture of me in Disney World. That's the name of the gift shop for the Haunted Mansion. How brilliant is that? Memento mori just means reminder of death. So you see in a lot of old paintings, for instance, there will be a little skull hidden somewhere. One of the coolest examples is called The Ambassadors, and I forget at the moment who was the painter. Anyway, look up The Ambassadors. It's a picture of 2 men. They're in front of a bunch of shelves of various items that were important at the time. And then in the rug, there is this kind of distorted figure. And if you pass the picture, or if you hold it up kind of sideways, you can see that it's actually a skull, but it only comes into focus when you look at it from a slant. Very cool. Another example of memento mori. So, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He's borne me on his back 1,000 times. Here hung those lips I've kissed, and I know not how oft. And yet, he starts off just remembering his friend, and then, of course, because it's Hamlet, things get much darker. He ends his speech as he's speaking to this skull with this: "Now get you to my lady's chamber." I feel like I need Yorick for this. I mean, finally, it's Yorick's time to shine. "Now get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that." Whew. Okay, so what he's saying is get thee to my lady's chamber. My guess is that he's thinking about his mom there and not Ophelia, but really it's anybody's guess. And let her paint an inch thick. He's talking about makeup there. I don't know what's with Hamlet and makeup. He really hates it. He says to Ophelia earlier in Act 3, Scene 1, God has given you one face and you make yourselves another. And he's partially talking about makeup, but he says, let her paint an inch thick, to this favor she must come, make her laugh at that. Everybody ends up like this. It's chilling. It's really a creepy moment to me that he's immediately reminded of the women in his life and how it doesn't matter how they primp or preen or seem to be happy or any of that. Eventually everybody comes to the same end. And this is almost the height of his obsession with death throughout the play. He thinks about the whole thing, obviously, and he will come more to terms with it at the end than he has here. But anyway, that's a little bit about the alas, poor Yorick section. Horatio tries to shut him up after that by telling him he's dwelling too much on death. Hamlet will not be stopped. He always is the one who needs to have the last word. And so he says, do you think that Alexander the Great looked like this? Maybe his ashes were like, stop a beer barrel now. And Horatio's thinking, just shut up, Hamlet, just be quiet. Enter the funeral of Ophelia. Fantastic. Again, Hamlet does not know about what happened to Ophelia. He doesn't know about all of that. And so he says, let's just see whose funeral this is. We'll sit over here. And when he begins to be able to overhear what's going on, Laertes is protesting how little they're doing for Ophelia's funeral. Shouldn't there be more? He keeps asking the priest. And the priest says, actually, no, because she may have committed suicide. It's a little unclear. We've given her as much as we can as the church, and really we wouldn't even have done this much if the royal family didn't make us do this much. He's very waffly. He's trying to ride the line and appease everybody, but it does no good. Laertes is outraged and basically says, you know, my I don't know about you, but my sister is in heaven now, and when you die, you will not be. His Laertes is at the end of his rope. He's a Laertes on the edge. Okay, so for all of you conspiracy theorists who thought that Gertrude perhaps was the one who killed Ophelia, it's a really fascinating theory, but here is why I think, or one of the reasons why I think that is not the case. So during her funeral, the body of Ophelia is put into the grave. Everybody is paying their last respects, kind of going down the line, and Gertrude scatters some flowers over the body and says, sweets to the sweet, farewell. I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. That might seem like kind of a small thing, but for Gertrude that's huge, because she loves Hamlet just to the moon and back. If she thought that Ophelia was good enough for Hamlet, in my opinion, that means that she would not have anything major against her. Certainly not enough to warrant killing her. Did Ophelia commit suicide? She didn't swim over to the side when when her dress was all bubbled up and she was floating in the stream singing. She could have just gone over to the side, but she also was insane. Maybe she didn't think of it. To me, it seems like an accident and not suicide, but like everybody else, I'm unsure. Here's where it gets really interesting. Laertes says he hears the name of Hamlet because Gertrude says it as she's saying farewell to Ophelia. Laertes just can't contain himself. In Laertes' mind, Hamlet is directly responsible, obviously, for the death of his father, but also for the death of his beloved sister. So Laertes says, "Oh, treble woe, fall 10 times treble on that cursed head, whose wicked deed thy most ingenious sense deprived thee of. Hold off the earth a while till I have caught her once more in mine arms." Oh my gosh! So first he curses the name of Hamlet. How somebody took away your reason, Ophelia, and that person is Hamlet. Curse him. and don't bury her until I have held her once more in my arms. And then he leaps into the grave. It's a fantastic stage direction. It's not quite Exit Pursued by a Bear, but it's close. He leaps into the grave to hold Ophelia one last time, which is it is a bit much, which is Hamlet's problem with it. It's a bit much, but Laertes really did love his sister, quite obviously. So he leaps into the grave and essentially says, kill me too, just bury us both here, and we'll both be buried in the same grave. Hamlet, hearing that, comes out and basically says, why are you acting like you're sadder than I am? And then he makes this proclamation, which again is one of those things that didn't stand out to me at first, but after reading this about 1 billion times for school, as we read it out loud, I love it. He says, "This is I, Hamlet the Dane." Hamlet the Dane is the title he would give himself as king. He steps forward and essentially says, I am the rightful king of Denmark. Claudius is standing right there, but then so are a lot of other people, so they can't really kill him on the spot. But he is challenging Claudius in a non-veiled way. He says, I am the rightful king of Denmark. By the way, Laertes, you can't be sadder than I am. And they have a grief off, basically. I mean, this is not Hamlet's finest moment. We see some of his lowest points, in my opinion, here in Act 5. And this is certainly one of them. He starts fighting with Laertes in the grave of Ophelia. It's outrageous. Everybody tries to pull them apart, and Hamlet says, I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. It's not you or him. It doesn't matter who's sadder about Ophelia. You don't have to win at everything. And yet he takes this as a weird competition, like he loved Ophelia so much more than Laertes did. Think about this. It's like Hamlet doesn't take any responsibility for the madness that Ophelia suffered. It's like he doesn't even connect the murder of Polonius to anything that's going on here. Like, he even asks Laertes, what is the reason that you use me thus? I loved you ever. He's talking to Laertes there. Why are you doing this to me? I was always a good friend to you. Does he not recognize the connection between killing his father and then the rage of the son? He's, sometimes for being so brilliant, he's really stupid. So here's one of those moments that people who think that Hamlet's actually crazy could point to say, here, look, he's actually crazy. He's not just pretending. He is verifiably mad. Mad as a hatter, or even more than that. I mean, I loved Ophelia. Really? Really? Because everything I've seen shows that maybe you don't. At the end of this scene, after the big fight between Hamlet and Laertes, Hamlet has his last word, of course, and says, let Hercules himself do what he may, the cat will mew and dog will have his day. And that's where that phrase comes from, dog will have his day. He's talking about himself, that eventually he will get his revenge for all of this, I suppose. So Hamlet runs off. The king tells Horatio to watch Hamlet. He's not the best, he doesn't do much but watch people, but he's not the best at it, as we saw with Ophelia. And then the king turns to Laertes and says, remember our conversation. This is not the last word. We will take out Hamlet. As though Laertes needed more reason to want revenge against Hamlet. This fight, this whole interaction, has given both of them, Claudius and Laertes, reason to want Hamlet dead. King says, strengthen your patience in our last night's speech. We will put the matter to the present push. Good Gertrude, set some watch over your son. Your son. He has no part in the ownership of Hamlet at this point. And in Act 1, Scene 2, Claudius said, consider me like a father. You lost your father, everybody loses somebody, just think of me as of a father. Here he is just throwing that off completely and saying, set some watch over your son, Gertrude. I am done with this person. So things are heating up, man. and we only have one scene left to go. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any additional thoughts, please add them down below. I'll do my best to answer your questions, or at least, you know, give you a shout out if you have something interesting to say. And I will post another video on Monday. Be sure to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness. All right, bye.